Okay, so welcome everyone. We are continuing our delving into the world of Kabbalah, and tonight we're going to be digging into texts. And I was sharing with Cindy a really interesting week of tracking down texts and discovering books that I've had for probably 10 years or more that I never took a look at, and and then I found out it's fantastic. I'll show you this book, only to discover actually I have two copies of this book, and I still managed to avoid looking at it. Anyway, so any questions or things before we get started related to the subject, just to add a slight bit of discipline to our study? Okay, so I am going to start sharing screen.
Do have a question, Rabbi.
Okay.
So Kabbalah, we understand, is kind of a area of special interest in the Jewish community. So looking at Israel for a moment, how popular or how much participatory is there among Israelis? And I include all of the Israelis. Let's say the vast majority are considered secular, as well as the other, denominations. Do people pay attention to Kabbalah in Israel?
Yeah, so what I would say is um, Kabbalah is very much part of normative Judaism.
Hmm.
So from Lachadodi on a Friday night to it's going to be Shavuot, the idea of studying late into the night on Shavuot. Um, so so Kabbalah, a Kabbalistic take on Judaism, is inseparable from Judaism, I, particularly as we get more into the Orthodox world. So as you know, although I don't know, 60, 70% of Israelis are secular, the synagogue that they don't go to is an Orthodox one. So there is this sort of sense that among many Jews that aren't terribly involved in their Judaism, that uh, the real Judaism is really Orthodox Judaism. So even though they're not practicing, there's this sort of sense there's this sort of sense that really is the real Judaism. And I would say Kabbalistic thought is very much a part of Judaism. Particularly the more traditional you get, the more deep it is. And then if you get into the Hasidic world, it becomes a fundamental aspect of Hasidic Judaism. So I would say, Chabad in particular, but Hasidic Judaism generally is is you know is drenched with Kabbalah and Kabbalistic understandings, and things like reincarnation rather than strictly resurrection is becomes a very much a part of Kabbalah. We will get into this, and so it is. It's not the sort of oddity at the fringes of Judaism. Now, what I would say is that conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism has treated it as such, which is why most of us have never been exposed to it. But Judaism really is, I would say, entranced with Kabbalistic ideas.
Thank you.
And okay, it's a very good question to begin with. Okay, so refreshing your memory a little bit, one of the understandings, basic understanding, I would say, in rabbinic Judaism is that God speaks to us through texts. Sacred texts have been delivered to Moses and to the prophets, and is our Bible and our Talmud and Midrash and so on. And if we really want to know the mind of God and what God expects of us, the way we get into that is by studying our text more and more deeply. And I discovered at least, I think, two different ways of studying text this week. And I don't think I'm going to torture you with them because you will go nuts even hearing about them. One, I don't even know well enough to understand, and the other one, at least I do understand, but I've heard before. Let us begin with Deuteronomy 6:4, a very familiar prayer. If Jews know nothing else, they know the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And this is just a few of the possible translations, and really focusing on the meaning of the word Echad. Again, you will hear me say this over and over again. I now feel a little safer because you can't throw anything at me directly. But I say this so often that, I sometimes think people are going to throw things at me. Hebrew is, I would say, multivaried in meaning. And with different shades of meaning, you come up with different meanings of the text. We're going to see a couple of astounding examples of that tonight. Well, I don't know tonight. I've been monkeying with my PowerPoint slides. I have no idea how far we'll get. But here is a very important one. So I'll just kind of comment word by word. Shema means listen. Yisrael is, who the command to listen is. Moses, this is in Deuteronomy. So Moses is speaking to all of the Israelites. So it says, listen up, Israel. Hashem, Adonai, God's actual name, is Eloheinu, is our God. Hashem, Adonai, Echad. And now the question is, what in the world does Echad mean? Echad certainly is, if you're counting, Echad is just one. Okay, but here's a bunch of different kinds of meaning. And one of the ways you can have different kinds of meanings is the verb to be is often not written out. It's understood. So here's one translation. Adonai is now our God, and Adonai will be one. That's perfectly justifiable. Another one is Echad could be alone. Adonai is our God, Adonai alone. So, one explanation is Echad meaning one could mean there's only one God. There's not 2 or 6 or 17. Alone means Adonai is our only God, but there could be other gods. There's the familiar translation. Adonai is one. Echad can mean unity, and we'll see this is what the Kabbalists are going to pick up on. And one indivisible Adonai could be a unique Adonai. Echad could mean ultimate. And here's the one really that the Kabbalah is going to pick up on, and that is Adonai is unity. Adonai is everything. So the reason, well, I can even say the reason we can get both Judaism and Christianity from the Hebrew Bible is because it is so easy to have different translations and different meanings associated with the Hebrew. And I would not imply that one is correct and one is incorrect. That they are just different. So on the
Rabbi,
subject, yes, go ahead.
may I ask you a question?
Sure.
I am not sure, but the Shema Israel. I think I'm not sure if it's the first time when Joseph told Jacob on his dying bed, because Jacob's name was Israel.
Yes.
Shema, listen, Israel.
Yes. Okay. So let me explain. You're talking about Midrash. So it's Midrash. It's not in the Bible. If you go back to the Joseph story, it's not mentioned anywhere there. So the question is, the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, is first in Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is long after Jacob has died, long after Joseph has died, and now we have this prayer. So in the prayer, in the synagogue, we sing Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and then the next line is Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. So the next line is blessed is his glorious Baruch Shem Malchuto. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. But that is not Deuteronomy 6:5. Deuteronomy 6:5 is V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, is you shall love Adonai with all your heart, with all
Yes.
your soul, with all your being. So the normative reason in prayer for whispering the second line is so that people won't think it's part of the book of the Torah. Second line actually comes from Psalms, I believe. But there's a great midrash to which you are referring, Erwin, where Jacob is dying on his deathbed, and he's an old man, and he is in Egypt, and he's worried about his sons adopting the religion of the Egyptians. And he voices this concern to his sons, and they respond to him by saying, Shema Yisrael, listen, Israel. His name is also Israel. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai is our God, Adonai alone. And then he gratefully says, Baruch Shem Kivod, blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. So that's a midrash. It's another way of reading the same lines, Erwin. And as you know, I love midrash, but it's definitely not in the Torah or Bible.
Thank you.
Okay, so the meaning of echad. I have a book on the shelf behind me, which is 25 essays on 25 different meanings of echad. And so you probably can't see this, but Larry Kushner is one of the authors, and he's talking about the unity that is not one. But it's a great book. It's probably out of print. It's worth a lot of money. Some of these books I have are old, and when I look them up on eBay, I don't know if anybody actually pays the prices they have on eBay, but some of them actually are listed at quite high value. But what the point and the reason I show this slide is here's an entire book dedicated to 25 possible meanings of the word echad. And I would say, in principle, you could probably write a book about every other word in the Bible also, exploring different levels of meaning. So that's just, to raise your awareness. And while we're talking about Israel, Jacob, Yaakov gets his name changed from Yaakov, which means heel, to Israel when he wrestles with a god. He wrestles with a being which is understood as a man, as an angel, and as God. So the word Yisrael means one who struggles with God, but it can mean a bunch of other things. Yashar can mean go straight, so like be straight as God or straight to God. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities. And I always talk about this because I will meet people and who will say to me, Rabbi, I've got problems with God. People who are struggling with health, struggling with tragedy, struggling with, just the news, you name it. And they'll say, I've got problems with God. How could God allow? We talked about allowing Auschwitz, so allowing disease and so on. And I say, you got a problem with God? And they'll say, you're damn right. And I say, welcome to the club. And the name of our club is God Wrestlers. We are the folks who argue and struggle with God. I often comment that Islam is very close to Judaism in its theology and practice, but very different in this regard, because the word Islam and Muslim means the submission to the will of God. And I would say that's even closer to Kabbalah. Kabbalah very much embraces the idea that everything that is happening according to the will of God, which is fine as long as it's good things that are happening. But when horrible things happen, then it's a little harder, at least for me, to believe that this really is God's plan and God's intent. Okay, there's a good image. I sometimes have fun going through the internet of a rather muscular Jacob wrestling with the angel. Okay, so there's also interesting calligraphy. And remember, we talked even about the bet, the shape of the letter bet having significance. So if you opened up a mezuzah scroll, if you opened up a Torah scroll, this is what it would look like. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then immediately following it is V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, B'chol lebavcha, V'chol nafshecha, V'chol me'odecha, and so on. Those of you who know that prayer and will recognize it. But notice that the ayin in Shema and the Daled in Echad are written large, and you will find that in every Torah scroll. You will find that in every mezuzah where this also appears. So the question is why? So the ayin and the daled have two explanations, probably more than two, but two when that I thought of when I wrote this slide. One is that ayin daled is the word aid, which means witness, or it can actually mean congregation. Or so the name of our congregation in Thousand Oaks is Adat Elohim, and Adat is from the word aid. So Adat Elohim means witness of God or congregation of God. And then the large ayin ensures that you don't mistake it for an aleph, because both ayin and aleph have no sound at all, right? You've heard of like the silent E and so on. Well, we have two silent letters in Hebrew, and they are those two letters. But if it was written when you hear it, Shema, you might think, well, maybe it's an aleph. Maybe it's this word. And the word Shema in Aramaic means perhaps. And we certainly don't want people thinking, perhaps Yisrael, Adonai is our God. And the other, the reason the Dalet is written large is the Dalet very much looks like a resh. If you look at the Dalet there, you see there's a little overhang between the horizontal beam and the vertical beam. If it were just a smooth section, that would not be a dalet, it would be a resh. This can drive you a little crazy when you're first learning Hebrew because they look so much alike. But if you misread this as having a resh, you would read this as acher, which means another. So we wouldn't want to say Adonai is our God, another God. So these are sort of telegraphic hints or reminders as what's going on. Again, the underlying understanding is the text is infinitely deep in meaning. So even the way we write the text, and I actually don't know, I should know this, but I don't know how long this particular scribal practice goes back, but I suspect it's quite old, but I don't know how long. So now we're going to get back into this word echad. And the mystics, the Kabbalists, understand the word echad to mean unity. So Adonai echad means God is unity. God is the ultimate unity of the universe. And a lot of my readings this week have been underlining that idea. So here's the idea. Everything is God, and God is everything. And it's not pantheism. We're not worshiping trees and bushes and squirrels and the sun and the moon. But the idea here is that God is everything, and everything is God. And the analogy that's used, and it goes back sometime, I always get this from Larry Kushner, is if you look at the sea, you will see a wave, right? If you see a wave, people are surfing. The wave looks like a distinct entity, but in fact, the wave is part of the sea. If you look at your hands, okay, your hands look like a distinct entity. You have fingernails, you have skin, you have red blood cells, you have white blood cells, you have a liver, you have a heart, you have, lungs and so on. So we have names for all of these entities, parts of your body, but they're all part of your body. So taking that idea and expanding it to the concept of God, we have a perception that we and others and things are separate from God, but the Kabbalistic mystical understanding is it is all part of God. And here parts of the tree. This is one that actually Larry Kushner would say often, and reading some of these texts, realize it goes back to some pretty ancient Kabbalistic texts. Okay, so here's a test for you, and I don't want you to think about this so much. So when I count to 3, point to God. You ready? 1, 2, 3, point to God. Okay, we have a few people pointing up, more people pointing up, thankfully with your index fingers. Some people pointing in lots of different directions. Some people pointing all around. Good. So here are two valid images of God. I want to emphasize that they are both valid. I'm not saying one is correct and one is not correct. The first one, in this image, God is up there and I'm down here. Okay. And I think if you point it up or even like this, that conveys that image. And it's a very appropriate normative understanding of God. And it's typified by every one of our blessings. Every one of our blessings begins with the phrase, Baruch atah Adonai. Blessed are you, Adonai. Well, if I'm saying blessed are you, then I'm making a distinction between you and me at minimum. Also, rabbis I have studied with point to the fact that this is a very spiritual element of every one of our blessings. Because if I say, blessed are you, I am speaking in the second person. Namely, I am speaking to God. So you might think you're just saying a motzi over some bread, but in Hebrew, at least, if you stop and think about it, you are actually speaking to God. But very normative. God's up there in heaven. We are down here. When God wants to meet us, God comes to the mountaintop, right, on Sinai. God tells us to build a Mishkan so that God can dwell among us, and implying that in some sense, without the Mishkan, without the tabernacle in the desert, without the temple, that somehow God has more difficulty dwelling among us. Very, very normative. God and we are distinct. The mystical idea of God, the Kabbalistic idea of God, is God is everywhere and everything. So it's pretty hard to do this on a slide, but I have dashed lines, and the thing for me is also a dashed line. There are moments, for most of my life, I absolutely think of myself as a separate entity. And what the mystics would say is every now and again, deep in prayer, deep in a mystical moment, deep in, a spiritual moment, you might lose track of your being. You might lose track that there is any you at all, that you're I don't know how better I can describe. Anybody have experience of that, of kind of losing a sense of self at any time? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, Rabbi, when you are in a zone, you lose yourself.
I would say that's true. I would say that like an athlete in a zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never gotten close to
Or
as
when
much of
when you meditate, all of a sudden you not your body is irrelevant. Your
so I
soul is the one which is most important.
right. So I would say that is true, and that's why meditation becomes an important part of Kabbalah. There is a concept in Kabbalah called devekut, which comes from the same root word as the word devek, which means glue, of trying to attach yourself to God. Anybody else want to comment on that experience? Alan, and then Cindy.
I was thinking about endorphins when I used to run, and I didn't get to this level very often, but the idea is there are hormones that kind of give you this, it's not called adrenaline, but it's that way in which it takes you to a different place.
Right. I have heard that. Um, but of course, the mystics are not talking about your biochemistry. Hold on a second. Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I have that. No, I'm sure I have that experience whenever I'm in the garden. And it seems like the boundaries between me and the plants I'm tending are gone. It's just not there.
Nice, nice.
I remember a very powerful moment the very first time I was in Jerusalem. I got in, 8, 9 at night. Left my wife at the hotel. I had to get down to the hotel to the Western Wall. And I got there around 11:30, 12 at night. And for one moment, I was standing at the wall, and there's not so many people there at that time of day. and I was absolutely alone. There was no one else touching the wall. And I remember, just being lost in that moment. Paul.
Yes, there were times when I was in Yosemite Valley, and I was in the big trees, Mariposa Grove of big trees, and I went near a tree and I put my nose on the bark and smelled it. It smells like maple syrup.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, this has got to be, I would say, godly. It's not God, but it's godly, because I was enthralled with the way it comes up from the ground and the way it
Yep.
stands.
So I know what Larry Kushner would say. He
Yes.
would say, once you use the word, I said to myself, you were aware of yourself.
I see.
So the experience, which I think is much tougher, is
Yeah.
just to lose all self-awareness. And I'm not sure I actually did that as well, even standing at the Western Wall. I'm
Yeah.
sort of too
Rabbi?
self-aware. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to ask you, how do you explain the word Ein Sof?
Oh, we're going to get into it. We are going to get into it in great detail, Erwin. You will be thrilled.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So, the mystics' understanding of free will, which gives me heartburn, the mystics understand that since everything is God, then everything is under God's control, and everything is just as it should be. And Larry Kushner will often say, I've heard him say this more than once, this is a theology that shouldn't be brought within 100 yards of a hospital. Because it says that the cancer, the accident, even the war, the Holocaust, gas chambers are all under the control and of the will of God. And I have to say I can't go there. That my own shortcoming, perhaps. And so I have personal difficulty with this. And although I love to study Kabbalah and teach about Kabbalah, I am not a Kabbalist. So I'm going to call on Les and then Alan. Go ahead.
Yeah, my favorite line of poetry, I think it's by Robert Browning, is God's in his heaven and all is right with the world. I don't know if you've heard that before. I love that line of poetry.
Do you believe that line?
Yeah, I do. And
okay,
when
so
I
the gas,
right
so the gas
world,
chambers are so then the gas chambers, the Holocaust is all right.
The way I didn't say it when it says God's in his heaven, all is right with the world. The way God created the world, everything's not perfect, and it's the way life is. I don't like it. My wife is quite ill. I don't know why she is, and all that sort of stuff. But it's the way God wants it, and I don't know why He wants it. I struggle with it.
Okay.
But it's the right. It's the way the world's supposed to be, and I don't know why.
Yes. So to be fair, and I'm glad you raise it, I would say the Kabbalists would say these things, illness and Holocaust and so on, are horrible, but they are part of God's plan. And, it's no big surprise that we can't understand God's plan. As I quote Harold Kushner as saying there are things that my plumber does that I don't understand. So that I would say that is true. The Kabbalists wouldn't say that the Holocaust is a good thing, but they would say that we can't understand God's ways. And I don't remember who. Somebody.
I'll give you
Alan.
a perfect.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Les.
I'll give a good example. When you're a child and your mother or your father runs out and grabs you out of the street, you go, "Oh, that's horrible. Why'd you do that? That's terrible. I was having fun." But they know that. I think you used that example a while back.
Yes.
You could get hit by a car. So our parents do things to us that we think are horrible, but they know it's the right thing to do.
Right. And that is the perfect analogy. And for me, that analogy has limits. I can't go that far.
I can't disagree with you.
Yeah. Okay, Alan.
So Larry Kushner, I know a while ago, has said that God has created the bad things as well as the good things. So when we think,
even the Bible says, "I create goodness and I create Ra." That's Isaiah. It's in Isaiah.
But it connects to this subject of it connects to what we were saying a few minutes ago, which I'm not remembering exactly. Then we're trying to separate the bad things from God as if it's not God. But if you go with what I learned from Rabbi Kushner, it's all God. It's all from
Yes, so that's what Kabbalah is saying. I would go with Harold Kushner, no relation,
God.
who would say there are forces in the universe beyond God's control. So those are two ways of looking at the same data. And I am a Harold Kushner guy on that theology rather than a Larry Kushner guy.
What about the free will part in this sense that God is responsible for everything, but doesn't God, by God's own definition,
Yeah, so God gives us free will,
yeah,
but God knows what our free will choices will be. And so I talk about this a lot. There's in the Pirkei Avot, in the Mishnah, it says, all is foreseen, yet free will is given. And which seems like a contradiction. And the explanation I use is it's like a movie. Inside the movie, the characters have free will. So the sweet young thing is headed toward the haunted house where a guy with a hockey mask and a chainsaw is. And we are yelling, no, don't go there, go back home, go back home. In the movie, she has free will, but the movie is in the can. Was made 30 years ago. There's no way that can change. So one explanation for that is God exists outside time. We do have free will. Otherwise, punishment for sin doesn't make any sense. And Kabbalists also talk about punishment for sin. If we don't have any free will, it doesn't make any sense that we would be responsible. We would get, benefits from doing mitzvot, good deeds, and we would be punished for doing bad deeds. If we didn't have free will, then we're just marionettes of God. We're puppets. And so free will is a necessity, but God knows our free will, and God has organized the plan to begin with, and it's going where God says it should be going, which I think is sort of the essence of less what you were saying. Although we may not like it, we may not like the, where it took us as individuals.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I have my own little midrash about these things, and I say that when God created us, He made a major mistake that our hearing, we don't listen to Him, and because we don't listen to Him, the free will takes over, and we do really bad things.
So, do you think that's a mistake of God's?
Yeah, because if He would have created us that we listen to Him and follow His instructions, then probably we wouldn't have gotten into all this trouble.
Probably we would still be in the Garden of Eden with no significance to our lives.
Maybe it's a good place to be. I don't know. I never been there.
Les?
Two quick things. I know you're familiar with the pleasure-pain principle. Without pain, would you experience pleasure? If everything was the same, some of the greatest pleasures when pain goes away. So the pleasure-pain principle is without pain, you don't really can enjoy pleasure. Does that make sense to you? You've heard it, I'm sure.
It makes sense to me as a phenomenon of healing. It doesn't make sense to me as theology. Well, I can't believe that my wife's death, my daughter's death, and my other two children's death are a way of making me appreciate something. I can't accept that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I can't accept it.
And also, when I hear people say God can't, the way I look at it is God chooses not to.
That's also a very interesting, subtle point of theology, which is entirely possible.
And I think it's horrible what you went through. And there's no way. I love God, but I don't understand it. I get angry at Him. I'm going, why do you allow this to happen? Why are people? And it seems like the irony is, it seems like the bastards of the world, like the Hitlers and all these horrible people, they seem to have a good life. They live a long time.
I don't know if that's true. But
no, I'm just saying.
Les, you say you struggle with God?
Absolutely.
Welcome to the club.
Who doesn't is the question.
Okay. So now this was actually the beginning of the second subject of that I taught last time. So the next set of material we're going to look at is a historical overview of Kabbalah, the Zohar, the central text of Jewish mysticism, the 10 Sfirot, which is an enormously important and confusing graphic representation of the nature of God. And we're going to look at some ways of interpreting the secrets of the text. One way is gematria, which is assigning a number to every letter and seeing where that takes us, and how that Kabbalistic approach deals with the question of how do we tie our prayer shawls, the knots which are called tzitzit at the end of the prayer shawls. And we're going to look at lots of Kabbalistic texts. Oh, and here's a thanks to our sponsor and a reminder about my website. I just haven't taken that out. Okay, so just a bit of history about Kabbalah. Historically, it was exclusively male. There were no female Kabbalists in Jewish history. I would say Judaism, for most of its history, was a male-dominated tradition and religion. It actually begins in Second Temple times. So the Second Temple is about, the temple gets rebuilt in around 500 BCE. So we're going back quite a ways. And with the idea of contemplation of God's throne. So if you've ever read the book of Ezekiel the prophet, it's very, very mystical and imaginative, and visions of God's throne and God's chariot called the Merkavah. So there's something called Merkavah mysticism. And so a remnant of that, Alan, you were asking about remnants of this. So in the Kedusha, morning and afternoon Kedusha, we chant Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavod, Melech Kol Haaretz Kivodo. And we go up on our toes, because actually one of the prophets, the seraphim, I was going to say angels, they are celestial beings. Seraph means fire. Seraphim are flaming celestial beings. You can call them flaming angels if you want. They are surrounding God's throne, and they're calling this out to each other. And we get up on our toes so we can get up there with the seraphim. And then we also have Hasidim, which are different than kind of the Chabad groups. The Hasidim that we are more familiar with is a movement that starts around 1700, but in the 1100s, 1200s, in medieval Germany, there is a movement of the Hasid, and it's a movement which really doesn't continue much, in that it is ascetic. The word ascetic means self-denial. So there was a movement that to get closer to God, to focus on God, we deny ourselves the pleasures of life. In certain traditions, this gets into self-flagellation, inflicting pain on yourself, going out in the cold, and so on. There's sitting in the snow. There's a lot of Christian influence here, but it never promoted sexual abstinence. Of course, in Christianity and clearly today in different Christian movements, there's absolutely this idea of sexual abstinence as an ideal. And what's going on there, and I don't know if Naila can comment. Naila's a minister. I know, Jim, you haven't met, but you've got a friend here in Naila. She is working with another family tonight, so she may just be listening in. The ideal in Christianity, it's very much a Greek influence that our soul, our bodies, and our spirit are separate, and our spirit wants to be pure and deny sexuality and just focus on God, but that damn body keeps having men and women chasing each other. So that is a practice which never really developed in a major way in Judaism. But in the history, that it's certainly worth mentioning. Alan.
I'm just reminded of what little I know of priests and the Pope. is that this concept becomes part of and nuns, I guess, also that becomes their practice for abstinence, sexuality, right?
Yes, and there are places in the New Testament where that idea is introduced. Less.
God says, be fruitful and multiply. So if we're supposed to be fruitful and multiply, you can't have sexual abstinence.
Right. But there's plenty of people on earth. We're doing fine with that. And by the way, Christians can eat pork. I don't know if you noticed that. They got, Easter ham. So, Christianity doesn't focus on obeying every commandment. Cheryl.
Yeah, but then if you believe in the Christian point of view of sexual abstinence and you become a priest, therefore you can leave all your money to the church. You don't have to leave it to descendants. So you do get some economics involved in here as to why you might have sexual abstinence. But we do have the issue of the Nazarites, like Samson, and when you take a Nazarite vow in Judaism to not, be sexually abstinent and not drink.
It's an ascetic vow, but the rabbis frown on it, and it's for a limited period of time. Samson is noteworthy because he's understood to be a lifelong Nazir. But the rabbis don't like the idea. In the Christian world, and I know many Catholic priests, and I would say more than the issue of inheritance. I mean, in many Christian movements, the monks and other spiritual leaders take vows of poverty, so they don't have anything to leave to their descendants, even if they had descendants. But it's also true that it leaves them free to focus on their flock. That in the world of being a rabbi, you might be expected to be going to committee meetings all the time and teaching all the time and visiting the sick and going to the hospital and raising money and going on blood drives and everything else. And if you have a wife and kids that want your time, that becomes a strain. But if you don't, you are freer to be able to do that. And I want to mention something that I think you might find interesting. One time I speak to Catholic groups a lot, and I was speaking at a Catholic school to seventh graders, and their teachers asked the students to write out questions, and he sent them to me before I came to speak to them. And my favorite one was the question, must rabbis remain obstinate? So I thought that was great.
What was the answer?
Abstinence is a natural tendency that rabbis often have, but abstinence is not a requirement. So okay, so let's move on. So we're going to actually start. Yeah, we have some time. So I want to talk about the Zohar, which is the central text of Jewish mysticism. So there are texts which are older than the Zohar. There are some texts that really date back to rabbinic times. The Zohar is not a small text, so this is probably with some translation and commentary, many volumes, and a translation by Daniel Matt. I'm going to say a lot more about Daniel Matt as time goes on. And it is, well, we'll see, it is written as a commentary on the Torah and a commentary on other books of the Bible. Remember, underlying assumption in Judaism. If we want to really get closer to God, if we want to really find out what God wants us to do, if we want to investigate the nature of God, we are just going to read texts, and we're going to read them carefully, and we're going to study commentaries. So the Zohar is a mystical commentary on the Torah and other biblical texts, and we're going to see examples of that. So one of my favorite words, it's an English word, pseudepigrapha. You may not have ever heard that word before. The Zohar is a work of pseudepigrapha. A pseudepigrapha is the opposite of plagiarism. In plagiarism, you take somebody else's work and you pretend that you wrote it, right? In pseudepigrapha, you write something and you claim that somebody else wrote it. Now, the question is, why in the world would you do it? Well, I can tell you from personal experience, if I write a book, I can sell about 5,000 copies of that book. That is not speculation. That's an actual fact, Jack. I sold 5,000 copies. If I discovered a long lost book written by Moses or written by, Rabbi Akiva, and I copy it down and write it, and people believe it was written by that person, I'm not talking necessarily about book sales, but the impact on the world is going to be much greater. So if you ask your local Chabad rabbi or Kabbalist who wrote the Zohar, he will say, or probably a he will say that it was written by Shimon Bar Yochai, a 2nd century CE teacher of Mishnah. And if you get a copy of the Zohar, in the original, it is written in Aramaic, and it is written in what attempts to be the Aramaic of the 2nd century, rabbinic Aramaic. But we know from a scholarly point of view, it was actually written in the 13th century in Spain by Rabbi Moshe de Leon or members of his school and his group. And we actually see examples of Spanish words creeping into the Zohar, medieval Spanish words. We see examples of 13th century Hebrew and some even medieval Spanish in the text. And to be fair, many people that even acknowledge the authorship is much later would say that Moshe de Leon was actually channeling Shimon Bar Yochai. So in Jewish mysticism, there is this idea, it's actually called a magid, which means storyteller. And there are examples of people, going into a trance and speaking in someone else's name. And there is a mystical tradition that they could write in the name of the spirit that has inhabited them. So that's, that is, I would say, could be an explanation for this. Alan.
This feels, I've accepted this story over a long time, but it certainly sounds dishonest. That the representation of the source will add to credibility, and once you get caught, it should be dismissed.
So, and maybe I'm stating it more lightly than I should be. So
Well,
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think it's dishonest that people believe that God and or Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible?
Question.
No, well, you're adding God and Moses in the same sentence. No,
that God dictated. Let me be very precise.
Well,
the normative Jewish belief is that God dictated the Torah to Moses, who wrote it down exactly as it was dictated.
Okay, but now we come down to who were the authors and so forth. Okay, so
but we only come down to that if you don't accept the premise that God is the author.
But this Zohar scenario isn't about God. It's about another author because it makes it sound much more impressive to
or it's possible. That's why I added this. It's possible that Moshe de Leon believed he was channeling Shimon Bar Yochai.
Do you say that because you thought that, or
I'm saying that because it's a possibility, and I also don't want to disparage those who believe it.
The preface from the real author in the Middle Ages should say that, if that's the mindset. That's all
okay.
right.
Okay, I won't dispute it, but that's what we have. That is the Zohar.
And it doesn't take away from the value to me, actually. I just think there's a certain part of that we should call it,
So what I would say is important is the Zohar is very influential in Judaism, and it's influential based on the idea that it was written by Shimon Bar Yochai, that it's ancient. So I'll leave it at that.
Doesn't matter.
So it is structured, as I mentioned, as a commentary on the Torah, and the underlying idea is that all the wisdom is in the Torah. So we're going to read the Torah very carefully, and we are going to come up with new insights into Torah, and those insights are authentically wisdom about God and the nature of the universe and the nature of God. In it, and this is going to be a question to Jim, in it, we read of a brilliant rabbi of 2,000 years ago wandering the Galilee with his disciples. Does that sound familiar, Jim?
Rings a bell.
Rings a bell. And there again, I think there's a historical basis for it, because around the time of Moshe de Leon, there was horrible anti-Semitism in Spain, ultimately going to result in 1492 with the Jews being kicked out of Spain. But there were pogroms, there were uprisings in Spain. And so this idea develops, wait a minute, we had a rabbi, pretty much around the same time, equally brilliant, wandering the Galilee, coming up with brilliant insights into the nature of God and reality. It provides a structure to the study and practice of Kabbalah. It introduces the 10 Sefirot, which we're going to talk about probably next time, and is very difficult. So here is some Zohar text. This is a commentary on the moment of creation. Okay, so in the Hebrew, we have the moment of creation. In the beginning, God created the universe. Okay. So here's the Zohar. Now this is, remember, translated into English. If you went into the original, it's Aramaic. There's no capital letters, there's no punctuation, and so on. At the head of the potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed. From the head of infinity, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. Ein Sof means without end. It split and did not split its aura, was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known, so it is called Reshit, beginning, first command of all. And this is the Zohar commenting on Bereshit, the first portion of Torah, and there's a page reference. The modern translation, which is Daniel Matt's, is accompanied by 3 pages of 13 footnotes. And this is just in English. So let me see. I don't know what I have next here. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to comment a little bit on this. Daniel Matt wrote a wonderful book, has written a bunch of books about Kabbalah, about mysticism, about the Zohar, and he takes pieces out like this, and he does a lot to explain it. We're going to read actually some literally photocopied from his books. And I have to tell you, I couldn't begin to understand it without all the footnotes. And also the fact that he's done a modern translation. You will find translations of the Zohar, probably on Sefaria, I'm sure on Sefaria, and they are actually not very good. It's just very, very difficult, and if you don't have the guidance to understand it, it's even more difficult. And the story goes, and I know Daniel Matt, I studied with him at spiritual retreats. And by the way, if you look him up on YouTube, Daniel Matt, M-A-T-T, you'll find talks that he gives about Elijah and about a lot of things. Every time he writes a book, he gives talks, and he teaches Kabbalah. He's a very good teacher. So I encourage you to look for him. And so he tells the story, and this happened during the time I was studying with him. So this was probably 25 years ago. One of his students, an adult ed person, reading some of his books, said, Rabbi Matt, what's a good translation of the Zohar into English? And he said, there really aren't any. And she said to him, why don't you write one? And he said, it would take me 20 years and a team of research assistants to do that.
Mm.
And she said, fine, I will fund it. And she was a member of the Pritzker family. So there is something called the Pritzker edition, of which there is now 12 volumes. And it's all English. If you want the original Aramaic, you actually can go online and download the Aramaic. But it's pretty sophisticated and powerful. Let me go like to one or two more slides, and then I'll call on you, Alan.
Okay.
So here's a little Zohar, and if you can see my image, I have this book here. It's really small, okay, and you too can put this on your bookshelf. And this is, it's just Aramaic inside. There's no translation. There's no punctuation. Oh no, there is punctuation. I take it back. I don't think there's vowels actually. It's so small I can have trouble reading it. And so here's this is what it looks like. And this is from its description on Amazon.com. And I know this is pretty small. From a description of this book on Amazon.com. It is said that just owning the Zohar can protect you and aid in your healing. You do not need to know Hebrew. In fact, most of it is so condensed that you cannot read it. The 72 names for healing can be scanned, however, and elicit the energy of healing. It is a beautiful small book that can fit in your pocket. Here's a demonstration. It's fitting in my pocket. Can fit in your pocket, glove compartment, purse. The gold lettering on the cover is expertly done. Pinchas is a section of the Zohar that involves healing, protection, and blessings. The energy of this small book is transmitted into your soul. It is like owning a piece of the Torah. Do yourself a favor and bring to yourself the energy and the light of the Zohar. You too can own the Zohar. And there's the 72 names of God. Okay, I'm not going to get into the Sefirot. It's a perfect place to pause. I'll tell one more story and I'll call on you, Alan. I was eating at a falafel place in the valley. And it was clearly a Jewish falafel place. There was a picture of the Rebbe, the Chabad Rebbe, in the falafel place. And as you know about falafel places, they give you the falafel, and then there's a big, what looks like a salad bar with all the sauces and onions and beets and you name it that you can put in falafel and other things that they sell. Above, I should have taken a picture of this. Above the falafel bar was that 27-volume edition of the Zohar. A little light reading while you're eating your falafel. No English, just, maybe it wasn't all the 27 volumes. No English, but just the idea, it's magic. This to me is magical thinking. The fact that if I have this with me, I will get some mystical benefit from God. Again, I'm not quite the Kabbalist to be able to go quite this far. Alan.
I just was going to add that one time when the Pritzker volumes first came out, and he was describing the challenge of his research using Aramaic as the basic, and the shortage of collaborating certain words which were long since not in use, which is not the problem people had studying Hebrew that they had with Aramaic. And he had to not invent things, but he had to connect certain dots. So he explained that this was an additional level. It wasn't just translating it, because he couldn't easily find sources to support every word. And so
what I would comment in a couple of ways. One, it is a problem with Hebrew. As you know, when we study Hebrew together as a group, when we study the Bible or Torah, we all have lots of different translations.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And in some cases, it's exactly what you said. No one knows what this means, because you have words there that only appear once in the Bible, and we really don't know what they mean. So a perfect example of that is, those of you familiar with liturgy know a traditional song sung by men to their wives on Shabbat called Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, and she is more precious than fine something. And you will find rubies, pearls, jewels, and so on, because no one quite knows what the Hebrew means. But at least we have a Masoretic text. We have a text of 1,000 years ago. So in the Hebrew, everybody's working from the same Hebrew text. That is not true with the Zohar. So the first task that, and I remember him describing this, the first task he had to go through was to collect known copies of the Zohar. And of course, these are handwritten copies. They're written in many cases, in some cases before Gutenberg, in some cases after, but he might get 12, 15 different copies. In certain cases, he would, I'm sure, just have pictures of photocopies of the text he was working with. So then the next step he had to go through is, which copy do I translate? Which word do I use? If there are different words, which one do I think is the best one to translate? And it isn't necessarily the oldest one, because when you're hand copying books, sometimes somebody makes a mistake and a later copyist will realize that and correct the mistake. And then what you'll often see in text like this is he will have, a little bit of translation, and then he'll insert a note saying in other editions it reads like this. So just getting the right text to work from was a challenge, much less translating it. And I would say rabbis are pretty good at Aramaic. I mean, anybody that studies Talmud seriously, and I study Talmud seriously, but I am, my Aramaic capabilities are pretty minuscule. I do have one or two dictionaries, however. I never have a shortage of books. But so it's a real challenge, and an even bigger challenge is writing the footnotes to explain what in the world is going on. And you will see that as I will have some copies, next week and as we go on, of some Zohar with Danny Matt's footnotes attached. And Cheryl, as always, has given us the link to the Pritzker edition. I have about half the volumes. I couldn't bring myself to. I bought about 6 of them, and I realized I am never going to
I only have the
use them,
so
I gave up after 6. Yes, Erwin.
I just would like to know that when is the separation of mysticism from Zohar? Because
okay, stop. I'm going to answer your question. So what's the separation between Judaism and Torah?
there's no separation.
Right. Torah is the central text of Judaism, right?
Yes.
But there are other sacred texts in Judaism as well. The Zohar is the central text of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah. There are other texts that we study, but the main text is the Zohar. That's the answer. Okay.
Yeah, but, I think I told you this example, and that time I didn't know anything about Kabbalah. When my father passed away, my father-in-law told me that after 7 days, I have to walk around the block or around the house, because that's for helping his soul to depart. And that I don't know if that came from the Kabbalah or
I would say the idea of at the end of Shiva, on the 7th day, you only observe Shiva for about an hour, or you're only required to observe Shiva for an hour. And then the tradition is during Shiva, you don't leave your home. So you symbolically end Shiva by leaving your home and walking around the block. Now, people will explain this in all kinds of ways. So, I've heard it discussed that in the early days following someone's death, the soul is confused and disoriented. So it's going from the grave to the Shiva home, back to the grave, trying to figure out what it's supposed to do. And the theory is, and I don't know the details of this, that the observance of Shiva is supposed to help the soul complete its journey from this world to the next world.
But my question is, did that come from Kabbalah, or it came, or was it that the mysticism which went into Kabbalah?
I don't know. But Kabbalah is a general term for mysticism. So if you're asking me, did it come from the Zohar?
Yeah.
Or other forms of Jewish mysticism, I will give you the exact same answer. I don't know. I don't know what the origin of that particular practice is. Les.
Wouldn't it be kind of important to know who translated the Zohar and then what their background was? In other words, are they coming from Orthodoxy, Reform?
Oh, I would say no one but the Orthodox is interested in the Zohar.
So the only ones that would translate it would be the Orthodox?
I would say every translation into English is translated by people who are interested in knowing about the Zohar, and I'm not aware of serious interest beyond Orthodox, because as I mentioned, I think the first time, Kabbalah begins with being Orthodox. If you're a Kabbalist, you start with being an Orthodox Jew. And now the question you're asking yourself, how can I do even more? How can I cleave closer to God rather than just, what the Shulchan Aruch, what the commandments tell me? I want to go deeper. So I would say, there's a Sonsino translation of the Zohar, and then there's Daniel Matz, and I think the Kabbalah Center has a translation.
Are they tremendously different in the translations? Are they
I haven't really compared. Well, I've looked at the Sonsino translation, and I would say it's almost completely incomprehensible. And that's compared to the one I just showed you, which I find infinitely more comprehensible. But I have to say it's much more comprehensible because I've probably read about 100 books on Kabbalah. Alan.
I'm having a little problem with the way you worded this, that the Orthodox only own this Kabbalah stuff because everybody in the room today.
Yeah. Let me be more specific. You're right. I said it too loosely. Yeah. Anyone who is going to take the time and effort to translate the Zohar from Aramaic to English probably has an Orthodox background.
Okay, sure. That would be, but
which is really the question that Les asked.
Oh, maybe. Okay, I don't remember what he said, but what I wanted to offer is that one of the reasons that I enjoy learning deeper into traditional Jewish and rabbinic that was not part of my Reform education for sure, is that I get opportunities to pick and apply interesting things that I wouldn't have known. I didn't know. I would never know if I stayed, right. If we only had classical Reform. And so the Kabbalah, for the Reform people that I know, which is a small number, find it very interesting. And even at my temple, Danny Matt has spoken, and so the whole interest level is significant. The mechanics of it, or whatever the word would be, the scholarship and it requires an education that you're describing. That
yeah. So what I was really saying, and I probably went a little too far in saying it, is the translations that exist aren't different because one is a Reformed translation, one is a conservative translation, one is an Orthodox translation.
Yeah, sure. That was
which I think is what Les was asking. Right. Jerry.
If you're considering it an Orthodox text, why do our Reform rabbis, at least the three that I know of from being in their office, have a copy?
Why do they have a copy?
Of the Zohar. If an Orthodox...
Well, they have a copy of the Torah. That's an Orthodox text. It's a Jewish text. The Zohar, and maybe this gets back to the question I think Alan asked, that Kabbalah is part of normative Jewish practice. And so I would say, just like the guy who owned the falafel stand, if you're really going to have anything approaching a complete Jewish library, you ought to have a copy of the Zohar.
Even if you can't understand it.
Yes.
Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I have a last question. Do you find it interesting that a woman was translating the Zohar, Margaret Pritzker?
Oh, she was funding it. She paid for it. Daniel Matt and
She was translating it.
No. So what I'm saying is she sponsored and paid for Daniel Matt and his team of people to work on the translation. To my knowledge, now maybe she was. Maybe her Aramaic was good enough so that she became part of the team. That's possible, but I'm not aware of that. But knowing Daniel Matt, I don't think for a moment that he would have a problem with that.
No.
If he had a woman who was a scholar, and there are women Kabbalist scholars now, if there's a woman who is a scholar of Kabbalah and Zohar and doing translations, I know Daniel Matt, I know his wife, and I don't think he would have a problem with that.
Right, I agree.
Yep. Okay, so we will continue next week, the Sefirot. And I guess, Alan, I might see you next week. No, you're heading out.
You won't see me, but I'll try to do the video and watch your videos. But
okay, so I'm gonna
work for me.
I'm gonna stop the
Yeah, so I'm gonna